he shouldn't have been fired for what he said. But it was nice just to enjoy the moment. Just to light a Cuban cigar.
This kind of King of the North moniker that he's basically given to himself. Do you mean the Northeast, which voted so heavily for Brexit, a vote that you want to reverse?
They literally think it's the solution to everything. Any issue you can come up with, they'll say digital ID.
It's that authoritarianism, isn't it, which just appeals to them so much.
All I can imagine is it would be leveraged against citizens in the event of another emergency.
Hello and welcome to the Spike podcast. I'm Fraser Myers, Deputy Editor of Spiked. Thrilled as ever to be joined by Spike's editor, Tom Slater.
Hello.
And we're absolutely delighted to be welcoming the living legend that is Mark Dolan, host of The Mark Dolan Show and a regular presenter on Talk. How you doing, Mark?
You clearly cracked open that can of Stella Artois a little prematurely. But thank you for the kind words. I'll let you believe that. Yes, I have to say that I've been sort of absent from the current affairs sphere for about 8 months, following a brief career interruption at the end of last year.
Yeah.
And it's not bad because I've just been reading and like actually not having to express opinions, but just absorb other people's.
Yeah.
And it's been quite refreshing actually to step outside. But I've missed contributing. And my son, a few months ago, he's like, "Oh, don't you miss like commentating on current affairs?" And I said, "Yeah, it's a little bit like being a retired cop, and you're in your local Waitrose or co-op, and you can see some scumbags in there filling their boots with shoplifting, and you're like, I can't do anything about it. I'm not a cop anymore. I don't have the badge, and so now, entering current affairs again, I feel like I've got the badge, I've got the handgun, I've got the warrant." And it feels good to contribute because there's a lot to talk about and there's obviously quite a bit that's not going great.
Absolutely. And we'll be looking forward to your contributions and you using the badge and the handgun in the next...
Have we run out of kind of like tired cop metaphors? I mean, obviously, I'm obviously like single. I go home, there's no food in the fridge, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
There's really short little affairs.
Spend your evenings on a very opinionated stakeout or something. I don't know how you would stretch these things.
And the vintage car, of course.
Of course, yeah. Which we saw you pull up in. So,
loads to talk about today. We'll be discussing Britain's Islamic blasphemy laws. We'll be talking about the brief cancellation of Jimmy Kimmel. And finally, the Labour Party's ongoing woes. But before we get into all that, I just want to remind all of our viewers and listeners that this podcast will be coming live from the Battle of Ideas on the 18th of October. And we've got another Spike podcast, the Last Orders podcast, which will be on the 19th of October. We've got some really exciting guests confirmed. For the Spike podcast, we're going to have Alison Pearson, Andrew Doyle, and Esther Krakow.
Way.
And Tom, do you want to tell us about what's happening with Last Orders?
Yeah, so Last Orders, people, if you haven't come across the show, you really should. It's myself and Chris Snowden talking about all the nanny state and kind of civil liberties used with a heavy dose of Lucy Letby these days. If you know, you know. So we'll be there on the Sunday. So far, we've got Patrick Christie's confirmed. We've got Dominic Frisby confirmed. And a very special third guest who, if they ever answer my messages, will be confirmed in no short time at all either. So definitely come along to that on the Sunday.
And so you can get your tickets now from battleofideas.org.uk. And if you use the promo code SPIKED, you can get 20% off. And I believe at the moment they're still doing early bird tickets. So you'll get the 20% off and the cheaper ticket anyway. So it's all just combined in a big, beautiful discount bonanza. So make sure you get your ticket as soon as possible.
You had me at a heavy dose of Lucy Letby. I'm all over that, and it would be a great name for an album. If I ever start a band, our first album will be called that.
That was very unfortunate now that I think about it.
So if you want some of that Letby, you've got to come and join us at the Battle of Ideas. So is Britain turning into some sort of Islamic theocracy? Earlier this year, we had the terrible case of Hamid Choksun, who was convicted, in fact, of a public order offence for burning the Koran in central London. At the time, a man attacked him, slashed at him with a knife. This man, Musa Qadri, has been spared jail. Tom, what the hell is going on?
No, exactly. So this case was wrapped up this week. Musa Qadri, the man who you will see in all the footage from that horrendous moment, slashing at Hamid Choksun with a knife, knocking him to the floor. He was finally convicted this week, which is progress, I suppose, but at the same time, on relatively light charges, common assault and possession of a bladed article. He got 20 weeks, but suspended, so he's never going to see the inside of a prison cell. And what is really striking is the contrast between these two cases. So, first of all, the fact that Hamid Choksun, who is this Kurdish Armenian asylum seeker, born in Turkey, comes to the UK, is anti Islam activist, burns the Quran as a protest against Erdogan's Turkey, and is not only attacked but is criminalised for doing so. But if you look at the way in which the criminal justice system in this country has dealt with them, and the way in which the judges address them and so on, the contrast couldn't be more stark. So Choskin was fined £240, whereas I think in Kadri's case, not only has he got this slap on the wrist, there's just a small victim surcharge, not much has taken place. In the case of Choskin, he was really hauled over the coals by the judge, who flatly refused to believe his justification that this wasn't a religiously aggravated offence because of the fact that he has no problem with Muslims. It's that he is a critic of the religion of Islam. Completely rejected that. Also, if people remember this case, this really horrific victim blaming logic that was applied, which was that this was an example of disorderly behaviour because they attacked him. So it's essentially saying, you know, by dint of the fact that someone slashed at you with a knife, your behaviour in burning this Quran was deeply provocative and bigoted. You then look at the Musa Kadri case this week, and the judge essentially sang his praises. He said, you're a man of outstanding character, you know, lovely to your mum and so on and so forth. You've really let yourself down, but there you go. Kind of slightly glazed over the fact that in the course of this investigation, Kadri actually tried to mislead the authorities by sending them a picture of a tiny little palette knife rather than the enormous sort of bread knife that he was wielding around. And again, ends up with a relatively light sentence. So you put these two things together, and you've got a country which is nominally secular, which supposedly hasn't had blasphemy laws since 2008, punishing Hamit Choskin under the guise of hate speech laws, but essentially for burning a Quran, for blasphemy against the religion of Islam, and then giving a very light touch to the man who attacked him. And I think what we're seeing here is that perfect example of the way in which kind of state intolerance, state censorship is inflaming violent intolerance, particularly where the issue of Islam and blasphemy is concerned. And we don't necessarily need to get ahead of ourselves and talk about us kind of plunging into the kinds of horrific scenes you see in like Pakistan or whatever to see where this road goes. So it just felt like this story couldn't really sink any lower in terms of freedom of speech, in terms of the British state's response to this new Islamic intolerance that we're seeing flare up on our streets. But we've got there with this judgment, I dare say.
Yeah, and Mark, obviously I was being a little bit provocative saying we're in some sort of Islamic theocracy, but clearly...
You've been listening to too much Nigel Farage.
Yeah, but clearly we do have a problem with censorship, and we do have a problem where Islam in particular is being ring-fenced from criticism.
Yeah, that's it. In the perverted world of woke, it's a protected faith. Mm. And I don't think any faith should be protected. I'm a Roman Catholic, and, you know, we've certainly got a few skeletons in the cupboard, whether it's paedophile priests or the rest of it. And, you know, no religion should be immune from criticism, which obviously is why, and it's been much discussed on this show, the definition of Islamophobia is a problem. Yeah. And the correct term should be anti-Muslim hatred, which is similar or akin to anti-Semitism or anti-Christian hatred. But the protection of a religion is a really, really bad place to go, which of course this government is drawing up plans to do just that.
Yeah.
And it's a real worry. And, you know, I mean, I'm a skeptic of all religions because it is religion that is the source of so much division around the world, so much tribalism, so much war and death. It's a big old headache. So there's never been a time when we needed to criticize it more than now. We saw, and we have seen from those weekly pro-Palestine marches, people chanting things which are patently anti-Semitic with impunity.
Yeah.
And it seems that the police, the authorities, are afraid to call it out, maybe because they feel they're outnumbered and that the genie is already out of the lamp. Mm. And then you've got the judiciary, and you've got, you know, what could be called the sort of the metropolitan liberal elite, the woke progressives whose ideology permeates all of our public institutions, who see Islam as this rather sacred thing that ought to be protected, even if they themselves are not of the Islamic faith. I mean, the story that we always have to come back to is the Batley school teacher, who perhaps in an ill-advised moment showed a religiously sensitive image. I'll go no further than that because lots of people know where this office is, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to get you guys in trouble. But the bottom line is a religiously sensitive image, which he showed to his students as part of a media studies course, and it was as an educational material. That guy still doesn't have his freedom. He's still on the run. It's not clear whether he's been reinstated as a school teacher somewhere else, married with kids. That is a scandal. And that is a perfect example of how this country is no longer it's no longer a place that has the normal rules around free speech and freedom of expression.
And Tom, it's kind of perverse in a way, because it's almost if the religion of Islam is treated as a victim. Anything that could insult Islam is therefore to be punching down. But the reality is that there are many Muslims as well who also suffer from this intolerance, very violent intolerance, and they're not protected by the police.
No, exactly. I mean, to my knowledge, there have been 2 Islamic blasphemy-related murders in the UK over the course of the past decade or 2. Both of which have been self-identifying Muslims. It was an Ahmadi Muslim in Glasgow, who are this very small dissenting sect who, particularly in Pakistan, but elsewhere, within the Muslim faith, are seen as heretics for all kinds of reasons that I won't go into. His family, incidentally, actually seeked asylum in Scotland because they were fleeing that kind of intolerance in their native Pakistan. He was killed back in 2016, I believe it was. And also a cleric in the north of England who was bludgeoned to death by these ISIS fanboys because they accused him of practicing black magic. So this is a picture that we're seeing repeated. And in the form of Hamid Choskan, it's also something which surely even supposed liberal, I mean, we should be concerned about this, whoever it's being meted out against, obviously, but even supposed pearl-clutching liberals, Hamid Choskan is seeking asylum in this country. And yet he was not only attacked on the streets of London for burning a religious text, the authorities basically said your attacker had a point, first by prosecuting him and convicting him under the guise of hate speech rather than blasphemy. But what we're increasingly seeing is that those two things are basically the same. But then also giving an incredibly light touch to the person who attacked him. And I think what we're really seeing here is that historically, blasphemy laws were often seen as a way of essentially maintaining order. So that when we still had our blasphemy laws back in 1979, when the last blasphemy case in England was being reviewed by the House of Lords, there's this famous quote by Lord Scarman who said the reason we have blasphemy laws is because it safeguards the tranquility of the kingdom. And essentially he even wanted it expanded to other faiths, as some people have been pushing for since. I think what we're realising is quite the opposite, that if you give a green light to this kind of intolerance, not only does that allow for a load of state censorship, it also says that the people wielding the knife, that the people sending the death threats, that the people hounding the Batley teacher into hiding for the many years that he has been since then, have a point. And that's been a story that's been repeating itself basically ever since the Rushdie affair. And it's the way in which British society has responded to this. British state institutions have responded to this with a mix of sympathy and cowardice, which I think has really inflamed what was always going to be a big issue, but certainly made it so much bigger.
And it's given succor to the extremists, who can now commit violence and be very threatening, as we've seen in some cases at the weekly pro-Palestine marches, which have left many British Jews afraid to leave their house at the weekend or walk around in any religious apparel in modern Britain. It was Madeline Grant, formerly of The Telegraph, who a while ago said that if Jewish people are afraid to leave the house, then we're not a proper country anymore. And that's how it starts to feel, because at every group, every community, people of all faiths should feel safe. Also, it's the double standards, isn't it? And you see it on Twitter, where there'll be a pop star who does a video and they dress up as the Virgin Mary.
Yeah.
And that's fine. But, the natural retort is, okay, fine, because I'm a free speech fundamentalist, do Islam next. And of course, that never happens.
Yeah.
And it's bad news for the millions of moderate Muslims in this country and the billions around the world who are people of faith, who have families, who work hard, who are a big part of our communities. They are friends and neighbours and colleagues, and so it's not good news for anyone, because you're pandering to the sort of hardcore rabble at the extreme end of any given faith.
Yeah. And finally, Tom, before we move on, the definition of Islamophobia, if it bears any resemblance to one that was previously concocted by Parliament, basically wouldn't just suppress criticism of Islam as a religion or Muslims, but also, things that have any tangential relation to Muslims and Islam, like the grooming gang scandal, for instance.
No, exactly. When the all-party parliamentary group on British Muslims drew up that definition back in 2017, I think it was, that seems to be the basis on which Labour has used for this new working group, for the new definition that they're developing. It explicitly references the grooming gangs as effectively an Islamophobic trope. So the very councils who have been covering up for that kind of horrific behaviour would have an extra incentive to cover it up or not.
They'd have the law on their side.
It's perverse. And yet this is the road that we're going down, even after the the horrific few years that we've had in relation to all of these issues we've been talking about. I don't know what has possessed them to go along with this, or I can suspect, but it's something that I'm hoping will produce a lot more pushback in the months ahead.
Is it about votes? Is it about the Muslim community that traditionally has supported Labour, that Labour fear they're going to lose?
I think it's a bit of that, but I think they are real believers in that. They think that, there is a significant amount of anti-Muslim hatred out there, and we need to put a lid on it. And I think they're just perhaps naive as to the consequences of what that censorship will lead to.
Is the love bombing of Islam to this extent, which turns it into a very sort of thin-skinned, narcissistic mindset? Because, you're so protected and you're such a victim, which is only feeds the monster, like I said, of the nutters of the extreme end. Is it a form of anti-Semitism indirectly?
Well, I think there are definitely people who are trying to make, essentially calling out anti-Semitism is sometimes deemed Islamophobic in some cases, especially if we talk about, the problems with the pro-Palestine marches. People have tried to essentially shut up, people pushing back against racism. But I want to move on to talk about Jimmy Kimmel, briefly cancelled for about a week. He's back on air. He was taken off air by ABC after he essentially insinuated that the Charlie Kirk assassin, or alleged assassin, was a MAGA Republican, which he clearly was not. So, Mark, he's back. Democracy is saved. Fascism is over. We can rejoice.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I breathed a sigh of relief to see him reinstated, because the worst thing that could have happened is that he got fired and he becomes a martyr of the progressive left in America. And he certainly would have come back somewhere else, possibly online, possibly on another network. But what's going to happen is that he'll go back, or he has gone back on air. He's had his moment in the sun with, I think 20 million views of his monologue on YouTube alone.
Yeah, and
in a few days.
6 million viewers, 4 times as many on the network. It was an 18-minute monologue, which is quite a lot.
Well, that's it. He knew people will be watching. And but what will happen now is that it's good. It's actually good news for everyone that he's back on air, because then there isn't the free speech, the concern about free speech in America, and the double standards of the right that you pointed out very well in the Telegraph just the other day. It was a great piece. And so I personally am a bit torn on this one, because fundamentally he shouldn't have been fired for what he said. But it was nice just to enjoy the moment. To light a Cuban cigar and just with a little brandy on the go, just going, okay, for 5 minutes, we're going to see somebody with all the right opinions cancelled, which has been the albatross around, over the shoulders of anyone that centre or centre-right in the past, the several few years. The cancel culture has been the domain of the left. And it is unfortunate that there are lots of people who did celebrate his sacking. I watched the monologue, his response to it, and I thought it was fine. I mean, he started crying at one point, which is something he does from time to time, which, okay, he's very sincere. He wears his heart on his sleeve. But I just think it fits in with a feeling that it's all about him. It's all about Jimmy Kimmel. The Charlie Kirk thing, I heard a commentator recently say that if it was George Floyd, comedians would have waited a week or two before doing jokes about it. But Kimmel was straight in there. And what I will say is that, yes, Donald Trump is his nemesis, and Donald Trump is a divisive man. He is provably divisive, right? That's his brand, is to divide. However, people like Kimmel are just as divisive and just as guilty of the tribal warfare as Trump or anyone else.
Yeah.
And I think that's why he's got his fingers burnt by getting too close in the sort of tribal warfare.
And Tom, he's experienced this sort of, I guess, a sort of 7-day trial period of cancellation. That's probably the most that many liberals would ever receive. And really, that's a good thing. You kind of want people not to be cancelled, regardless of where they stand and what they say.
Oh, no, of course. I suppose there are a couple of complicating factors here. One of which is that obviously cancel culture is an absolute scourge. And it is worth pointing out the disparity between things that people were getting cancelled for in the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder, assassination, and things that people were getting cancelled for in the wake of George Floyd's murder and the whole Black Lives Matter hysteria. So Jimmy Kimmel goes on his national television show and just spouts provable lies, whether or not it was misspeaking, whether or not it was something that he didn't intend to do. insinuating that the killer, Tyler Robinson, who even at that point was pretty clear wasn't part of the MAGA crowd, as he insinuated, is something that an employer would take an interest in. Should he have been summarily sacked? Almost certainly not. But it's not illegitimate for someone to say you can't spread nonsense on our airwaves, for instance. There is also, if you contrast that with the kinds of things that heads were rolling over in June of 2020, I mean, the Poetry Foundation in the US, which is this huge organisation, various of its leaders had to step down because their statement that they put out in solidarity with Black Lives Matter was deemed to be too short. Two people had to resign in shame for doing so. So there's a kind of disparity there. The other thing is, which makes it more of a free speech issue, I would think, rather than a editorial decision to can him shortly, or a strictly business decision, because of the fact that there was not only backlash to the monologue, but also, along with a lot of these late night shows, Kimmel's ratings have been cratering for a very long time, was the intervention of the government, was the fact that you had the FCC chair, Brendan Carr, very openly saying on a podcast that if ABC don't do something about Kimmel, we will, or else. And that is the point in which this does become a free speech issue. You've got the state trying to, as is often described in kind of American free speech debates, jawbone private institutions to get rid of people or to sack people or what have you. So there was obviously a free speech issue there. But I also think about the disparity between the way in which this case has been talked about. People on the American liberal left were more upset by Jimmy Kimmel being taken off air for about 6 days, I think, than they were about Charlie Kirk being assassinated for the views that he had. So if that's your free speech cause celeb, as opposed to the man who was gunned down purely for expressing opinions on a university campus, I dare say you're not on the right side of the argument.
Yeah. Mark, anything you want to add?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that essentially Jimmy Kimmel has entered the political arena. And the offending part of his monologue wasn't even a joke.
Yeah.
It was just calling out, or as you say, claiming that this guy was somehow part of the MAGA crowd, or his family were MAGA, that sort of thing. And so therefore, if he'd been taken down for a harsh but satirical joke, a kind of Frankie Boyle or Jimmy Carr style joke, well, then that would be a black and white case of, this is free speech. He was making a joke. But Kimmel wasn't even a bit of the monologue that was funny. Yeah. And I think that's how far down the rabbit hole these folk have gone. Whether it's Kimmel or Stephen Colbert, who's outgoing now. And then we know that over at Fox News, Gutfeld is storming ahead in the ratings. But it's going to carry on. The late night shows have become the platform for the culture wars to play out. It's actually been a perfect sort of rebrand for Kimmel, who's energized by this. And I do think you mentioned the American equivalent of Ofcom, who got involved.
The FCC.
And Brendan Carr, the FCC. And that was unedifying. He sounded like a gangster or something, like a scene from Goodfellas. It's like, well, there's an easy way to do this or a difficult way. I'll let you choose. So that was embarrassing. And obviously Trump has been completely puerile about it. But then that's priced in with Trump, isn't it? I will say, echoing your excellent article in The Telegraph, that the right missed a trick by not fighting for Kimmel to keep his job. Too many celebrated. I think I equivocated on X, and it was of that flavour of, well, this is fun. But I've always been clear that he shouldn't have lost his job. I'd rather that he just dwindled because of how tediously ranty the show has become and witless. I mean, Colbert, sorry to go on about it, but I keep an eye on those US talk shows, and it was like a couple of years ago. I was like, let's see what Colbert's up to, and I jumped on a couple of the monologues, and it was about Trump. But it was like 2022. I was like, you do know that he's not president anymore. And he's still ranting about Trump, even though the president at the time was the cognitively challenged Joe Biden, but not a squeak about him, of course.
Exactly. No comedy material to be mined there.
No. Well, speaking of people who may soon lose their jobs, let's talk about Keir Starmer. He is lurching from crisis to crisis. He's got various advisors quitting all over the shop. His personal approval ratings have hit -42, which is kind of Prince Andrew levels of popularity. And there's also the great Andy Burnham is over the water, making signals that he potentially wants the leadership. How exciting, Tom? How excited are you for Andy Burnham leadership?
I've barely been able to sleep. It's been absolutely fascinating. I mean, Starmer versus Burnham, it really is the sort of battle of the beige, isn't it? It's kind of Radio 3 versus six music.
Because the Tories, back in the day, the Tories had Boris waiting in the wings.
Yeah.
And whether you like Boris or not, you could argue quite a glamorous political figure.
We'll mix things up.
Like, bring back Boris. But it's not the equivalent with Andy Burnham, is it? He's not Labour's Boris.
Not in the slightest. And also, it's one of those things where because Keir Starmer is so rubbish, anyone looks good stood next to him, I suppose. But, Andy Burnham is just a different variation on the same theme. I mean, both of them are, politically speaking, really insubstantial. I think both of them are characterised primarily by their own political ambition rather than what it is they actually believe in. In both cases have kind of drifted somewhere between kind of the Blairite wing and the more soft left wing of the Labour Party, depending on what was politically expedient. You've got Andy Burnham, who's developed this this image of himself as the sort of almost semi-anti-establishment candidate. He's up there, Mayor of Manchester, running against Westminster. But he was in Westminster for more than 20 years. I mean, I think he became a special advisor in 1998. He held various junior ministerial and then actually Secretary of State positions under Blair and then Brown.
Straight out of Oxbridge as well.
Exactly, straight out of Cambridge University. And yet has now tried to re-establish himself as some kind of outsider railing against central government. And I'm amazed that anyone takes it seriously. There's been a few kind of quite gushing profiles of him talking about, essentially buying into this sort of image of himself and that he's so much more down to earth because he says lad a lot and wears jeans, as if that's enough to make you a breath of fresh air. The one thing he certainly has in his corner is the fact that, unlike Keir Starmer, he comes across more like a normal person. But is that really the great compliment that people seem to think?
Is there an argument? Has he got the pulse of the red wall, given where he is as mayor?
Well, I think because Manchester's a bit of a special case, particularly, Greater Manchester is still very much a big student population. It's the sort of place which is not dissimilar from London in many respects in terms of the makeup of the constituencies there and the sort of views of it. And that's why this kind of King of the North moniker that he's basically given to himself, as far as I can tell. I mean, what do you mean, the Northeast, which voted so heavily for Brexit, a vote that you want to reverse?
Yeah.
Are you talking about those various parts of the old Red Wall which are now moving towards reform in a big way? Just because the students of Manchester University think you're the best thing since sliced bread clearly doesn't mean that you speak for the vast swathes of the north of the country. So it's telling that he has been resurrected, because this guy, he ran for the Labour leadership twice in 2010 and 2015. When he lost to Jeremy Corbyn, it was so humiliating. He was seen as a complete flip-flopper, didn't know what he stood for. It was just embarrassing. I mean, there was one moment in 2015 where he went over to Mumsnet to do the kind of Q&A, and when they asked him what his favourite biscuit was, he said it was chips, gravy and beer, because he was so authentic.
Yeah.
Wow.
So this guy was a joke 5 minutes ago, but I think by dint of the fact that Starmer is just all over the map and is flailing, and there is no clear sense of what he stands for, people are more willing to go towards him. But I think it is just like a kind of reminder of the populists and the populist electorate are often dismissed as being a bit low information, not thinking about things too deeply, easy answers, whatever. The Burnham phenomenon, if we're even going to call it that, is purely about vibes.
Yeah.
There's no substance there. There's no policy, really. It's telling that people are so won over by it in the kind of SW1 media
the
sphere.
The flavour of what the policy might be, and this is going to have to come from any replacement to Starmer, is to take the government agenda leftward.
Yeah.
Which I've always argued there are times, during times of plenty, when that sort of progressive agenda has been appropriate.
Yeah.
And I voted for New Labour a couple of times, and the economy, thanks to actually a legacy of Kenneth Clarke as Chancellor at the tail end of John Major's premiership, which was riddled with sleaze, but actually they managed to get the economy back on a sound footing. And so that was a time when, you've got a sort of a Labour government that can splash the cash, put money into public services, all the rest of it. And so anybody that replaces Starmer is going to, increase taxes further. I mean, Burnham's talking about 50% top rate, which I think brought less money in when Gordon Brown introduced it as Chancellor, or I think became Prime Minister. That was one of his flagship policies.
Yeah, when he became Prime Minister, yeah.
And so, it's very unfortunate for the country that if Starmer's replaced, we're going to shift leftwards, because, as I say, there might be moments in our history where that's appropriate. But given the fact that our debt is so high, that the gilt yields are so high, that no one wants to lend money to us in any way cheaply, that if we were going to go further left and spend more money and borrow more money and raise taxes further and kill growth, I mean, it's just, kind of a crazy scenario where you're careful what you wish for. It's like we need to hang on to Starmer because the alternative...
So Starmer and Rachel Reeves.
And by the way, it's interesting how it's taken 14 months for this Labour government to become the Tories.
Yeah.
They've turned into the Tories, right? It's like everyone is jockeying for position. The race for the deputy leader, deputy prime minister is unedifying. You've got a cabinet minister in Bridget Phillipson who's accused her boss, or at least the number 10 machine, of being sexist.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an off message, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can you imagine? This is, Alistair Campbell and Tony Blair are like they're sort of spinning in their political graves at the sheer the catastrophe in terms of the messaging out of this government. I mean, why Bridget Phillipson hasn't been fired or resigned as a result of that, but it's such a basket case administration that that's not even a story.
It's nice, isn't it? The quiet, as Otto English said after the election, or Andrew Marr. Britain has become a haven of stability.
By the way, Labour do have a Boris though. And it's Angela Rayner.
Ooh, that's actually a good shout. But it is interesting, Mark, as you say. I mean, they're sort of fighting the 2010 election all over again. It's like they've forgotten that we went through the COVID period where we borrowed £300 billion. Borrowing at the moment in apparently normal conditions is similar to how it was during lockdown. It's reaching those kinds of levels. We have the highest tax burden since the Second World War. So any of these sort of, as you say, these sort of left-wing ideas might be appropriate at some point, but you think you've got to smell the coffee as to where we actually are. We've not been, we're not in a period of high, coming out of austerity or something like that. We're in a period of very high spending.
Well, I've always thought that a crisis tends to get rid of politics. So in economic crisis, essentially there's no longer, if you look back at 2008 and the coalition government, this was... And, it was just two parties with diametrically opposed views on a number of issues, including economy, the Lib Dems and the Tories. But they came together to do austerity. At the time, I think it was 2010, 2011, where the cost of government borrowing the interest on it was 60 billion a year, which was an unmitigated disaster. Well, it's double that now.
Yeah.
But they came together. And so politics tend to subside when there's a crisis. And we are now in the throes of an economic crisis. And what ought to happen is the politics ought to subside again. And what Starmer and Rachel Reeves need to do is say, I'm afraid the manifesto's out the window. And even just our philosophy as a governing party is out the window. Because what we've got to do is stop an almighty crash. But will that happen? They're going to have to swallow a big political pill to do that.
Before we finish, Mark, I want to ask you a bit about digital ID, because on the
you need
day
to see
this will exactly, we need to see it, and unfortunately because it's not physical, you won't be able to cut it up live on the show.
Yes, if only.
But Starmer is due to be announcing this the day that this podcast will come out. What's your take on that issue?
Well, I kind of found my political voice during the pandemic because up until that point I was I don't know really. I just always trusted the government. They're doing their best, and the authorities. What we had during COVID, as you both reported brilliantly on throughout, which is the authoritarianism, the silencing of dissenting scientific voices, the canaries in many coal mines who said, why are we printing money? Isn't that going to cause inflation? What about the debt? Isn't the medicine worse than the disease? All of which I would argue came to pass. So COVID radicalized me, and the authoritarian aspect of it was probably one of the worst aspects. The vaccine tyranny. Delighted the vaccine was invented, delighted it was available for people.
Yeah.
But the idea that you had to demonstrate you'd had it to go and have a pint was a complete catastrophe. And so therefore, whilst I probably would have been open-minded about a digital ID scenario pre-COVID, now all I can imagine is it would be leveraged against citizens in the event of another emergency.
Mm-hmm. And the way in which it's being argued for is so... it's one of those things which really underlines what an authoritarian mess this particular policy would be, and the fact that it's actually encouraging people to have more trust in the state, but in the context of state failures absolutely everywhere.
Yeah.
So the immigration issue is one that's been seized on by Tony Blair, who's been pushing for this. Sees it as a solution to absolutely everything from illegal migration to bad weather. It seems like digital ID will sort this out. So essentially, because
potholes, according to Tony Blair.
No, exactly.
Well. Potholes with digital ID.
You'll be able to report the potholes. It's a strange mix of kind of like state authoritarianism and the kind of Cones hotline kind of approach to politics. But because of the fact that the British state is incapable of controlling its own border, therefore you need to give up your freedoms. It's one of those things which, because the state is so rubbish at doing what are the fundamentals, It needs to encroach more and more into your lives. And I just think that's just not going to land with people. I understand that when you poll people, broadly speaking, about how they feel about a particular question, people tend to roughly be on side. But I'm interested to see when this debate really starts to take place, people start to see the pretty threadbare arguments that are made for it, and also the implicit authoritarianism of all of it, that hopefully that does become a proper debate rather than something which is just sort of steamrolled through.
Why are they gunning for this policy? Why do you think Starmer is pushing it?
I think it's
they see it's a silver bullet, don't they? It's one of the main
seems
things.
to solve every issue in their mind.
So they really believe it's a good idea.
They believe it's a good idea, and they think it will make the government more efficient. And those of us who are sort of libertarian or care about civil liberties are, outdated, and we should just be quiet, and it will just make everything better. They literally think it's the solution to everything. Any issue you can come up with, they'll say digital ID.
It's that authoritarianism, isn't it, which just appeals to them so much. Because first of all, they assume
we saw during COVID.
Absolutely.
It was
so readily.
The leftists who really got behind the vaccine mandates. It did become left versus right, didn't it, during COVID?
No, absolutely. And especially, I think that's one thing about middle-of-the-road centrists or sort of technocrats, which is often missed, is that implicit in all of their politics is authoritarianism. Like, you have to push people around. People shouldn't be able to have a say on things. It's for their own good. That's just kind of bound into their politics. And so therefore, every solution is more state rather than less. And I think this is probably just one of the most keenest examples of it. So,
can I ask you, because it's more for me to understand rather than express a view, the concerns, because I'm doing regular shows on Talk at the moment, which I'm thoroughly enjoying, and a lot of the callers say that this is the thin end of the wedge, or this is preparing the country for a potential Chinese credit score sort of situation where essentially if you've littered or, I don't know, drunk driving or something, then you suddenly, your card doesn't work and you can't buy a train ticket, which happens in China. Is that overblown, you think?
I suspect it is, but at the same time, we shouldn't be, we shouldn't discount the fact that it's already an authoritarian imposition for people to have to show.
Is it the thin end of the
ID.
wedge? I mean, could it be that it's an innocuous thing, but could be expanded to that over time once the infrastructure is there or not?
The frog can be boiled very slowly, but I don't think that they are intending to take.
It wouldn't come in tomorrow,
and I don't think there's a nefarious plan to take us towards that. But liberties can. Suddenly the Overton window shifts.
Well, yeah.
What was acceptable, what liberty was acceptable to take away today becomes more acceptable tomorrow.
Help me with conspiracy corner here, but the ULEZ cameras in the southeast, they potentially have the functionality to have a pay per mile, sort of solution for the government. Is that true? So therefore, you just wonder whether when you have this digital ID, that then eventually in years to come it can be leveraged more dramatically.
I don't know about the capabilities of the cameras, but it's certainly paper mile is on the table for something government has been talking about for a long time.
Exactly. They're not even hiding it. There is no grand conspiracy where that's concerned. They're saying it very openly.
Wouldn't it be funny if the ULEZ cameras were like perfectly functional for that need? That would be quite something, wouldn't it? Be quite telling.
Mm-hmm. And the slippery slope can be real and a problem, even if it doesn't end at Xi Jinping's China. I think in the same way that I think people who are dismissive of civil liberties concerns in nominally liberal democratic countries are like, don't be ridiculous, you're being hysterical, we're not going to become some sort of personalist dictatorship. But that doesn't mean it's not a problem. And in the same way, you don't need to pretend that it is going in that direction next Tuesday, to protest against this stuff to the hilt. So it's one of those things where even though it might not live up to the concerns that some of your listeners might have, that doesn't mean it's not a problem that's going to be very difficult to push back against, because this is the kind of common sense position of the British state, is that they need these impositions, because otherwise you can't properly govern the country, and it's going to take quite a lot to dislodge that.
Fantastic. We're over. We're done.
That's it.
That was an amazing experience.
Oh,
and
thank you for coming on.
I've watched the show and it's brilliant, and to sit here and do it was a real privilege.
Thank you so much for watching the Spiked podcast. We'll be back at the same time next week. In the meantime, why not subscribe to Spike's YouTube channel and then click the bell so you're always alerted whenever there's some new content. Spiked is producing more videos than ever, from podcasts like this one to interviews to our series of polemics. You really, really don't want to miss out on it. Plus, to get your daily dose of Spiked, just go to spiked-online.com. That's our website at spiked-online.com.